Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Richard P. Vere and Larissa Volonkonsky. Fyodor Mikhailovich Dostoevsky is best known for the series of novels he wrote in the last 20 years of his life. Notes from Underground, Crime and Punishment, The Idiot, Demons, The Adolescent, and The Brothers Karamazov, which made him one of the major figures of Western literature. These works were all nourished and partly foreshadowed in Notes from a Dead House, 1862, the author's semi-fictional account of his own experiences as a political prisoner in Siberia from 1850 to 1854. Together, Richard P. Vere and Larissa Volonkonsky have translated works by Chekhov, Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, Bulgakov, Leskov, and Pasternak. They were twice awarded for the Pen/Book of the Month Club Translation Prize. For Dostoevsky's Brothers Karamazov and Tolstoy's Anna Karenina. They are both married to each other and lived in France. A note on the Bicentennial Vintage Classics Edition 2021. The year 2021 marks the 200th anniversary of Fyodor Dostoevsky's birth. This revised edition of Crime and Punishment has been made in part to honor that event. Dostoevsky's life has been with us for 200 years and his work for nearly as long. The most remarkable thing about both is that they do not stay fixed in some period of the past. They keep reappearing alongside us or even ahead of us. Our working principles as translators have not changed in the years since our translation was first published. For translation being an art of approximation, the results are always open to improvement. We have gone over every word of our original version, catching occasional errors or misreadings, rethinking word choices, altering certain rhythms and phrasings. Our aim, as always, has been to render as faithfully as possible the multiple voices of the characters, the voice of the narrator, and the controlling presence of the author behind them all, in English inflected by its dialogue with the Russian original. Richard P. Vere. Forward to the First Index Classics Edition, 1993. I want to do an unprecedented and eccentric thing, to write 30 printed sheets or 480 printed pages within the space of 4 months, forming 2 separate novels, of which I will write one in the morning and the other in the evening, and to finish them by a fixed deadline. Do you know, my dear Anna Vasilyevna, that even now such eccentric and extraordinary things utterly delight me? I simply don't fit into the standard of staid and conventional people. In this typically ebullient fashion, Dostoevsky described to a friend the predicament he found himself in during the summer of 1866. He was then 45 and had behind him 10 years of imprisonment for exile for anti-government activities, the death of his first wife and his closest brother Mikhail, and debts amounting to some 43,000 rubles. A year earlier he had gone to escape his creditors with 175 rubles in his pocket, and an agreement with an unscrupulous bookseller, F.T. Stolovsky, to produce a new novel for him on November 1st, 1866. Following which, as Stolovsky hoped he would fail, all his existing and future works would become the bookseller's property. Fortunately, Dostoevsky managed to bring off this unprecedented thing, though not quite in the way he envisaged. Work on one novel, which had been appearing serially in the Russian Herald since January 1866, continued to preoccupy him into the fall, and meanwhile, not a word of the book for Stolovsky got written. Finally, on the advice of frenzy artist stenographer, the young Anna Georgievna Snitkin, who later became his second wife. The Gambler, dictated to her in October, was handed to the bookseller in time, and in November he went on to finish the longest serialized work, Crime and Punishment, the first of the 5 great novels that crowned Dostoevsky's artistic labors during the final 15 years of his life. The attempts of critics and literary scholars to define or simply account for what they have found in these novels may remind one of the Hindu parable of the blind man describing an elephant, each by a different part: a snake, a hogweed, a tree, a broom, a wall. Dostoevsky's own summaries in his letters and notebooks tend to be dry, schematic, and therefore misleading, because no novels are less dry and schematic than these. Furthermore, he was ready to revise his plans when new material discovered in the process of writing demanded it. Thus he wrote to his friend Baron Wrangel in December 1865 that the story he had been working on for several months, the first version of Crime and Punishment, had grown into a big novel in 6 parts. I had much written and ready by the end of it. I burned it off, I can confess it. I wasn't pleased with it myself. A new form, a new plan captivated me, and so I began over again, working day and night, and for all that I'm not working very much. A novel is a work of poetry. In order to write it, one must have tranquility of spirit and impression. A novel, at least a Dostoevsky novel, is a work of poetry, that is, simultaneous composition on multiple planes, and the critics can never be forgiven their perplexity about where to take hold of it, since the first perplexity of criticism is that it must speak monosemantically of the polysemous. But besides that, these were novels of a new kind, their multiple planes so divergent and so contradictory as to all but battle definition. So much so that one line of criticism, rightly noting the dramatic technique and high seriousness of Dostoevsky's writing, has called his late works novel tragedies. Another, with equal rightness, finding their roots may not be in satire and a carnival sense of the word. Called Dostoevsky's uniqueness as an artist lies in his invention of a form capable of combining such opposites, of sounding such depths. Carnival laughter has as much depth as tragedy, while never ceasing to portray the contemporary world, the everyday, in all the detail of its everydayness. What's more, Dostoevsky's novels refuse to stay put in their own period, where the novels of Tolstoy, Turgenev, and Goncharov have settled. They leap out of their historical situation and confront us as if they had not yet spoken their final word. The question is what inspired this form-making impulse in Dostoevsky. What reality do his novels imitate, or can we still speak here of an imitation of reality? To suggest an answer, we must turn to Notes from Underground, published in 1864, just a year before he began work on Crime and Punishment. This paradoxical little novel marked a break, a new beginning in his art, and in a sense all his later works grew out of it. It seems to have come almost as a surprise to Dostoevsky himself. He had been attempting to write a critical response to utopian communist N.G. Chernyshevsky, whose programmatic novel What Is to Be Done appeared in 1863. Instead of an article, he produced a tale, of once apologia and confession of the nameless man from underground. Dostoevsky's polemics with the radicals of the 1860s appear to represent a change in his convictions, though such questions are never simple. He had started out in literary life as a liberal critical of the imperial autocracy, sympathizing with the little man drawn to the ideas of the French utopians Fourier and Saint-Simon. In the late 1840s, he had attended meetings of the clandestine Petrashevsky Circle, which owned a printing press and planned to publish Fourier's writings. This led to his arrest in 1849, to penal servitude and exile. In Notes from a Dead House, a semi-fictional account of his prison experiences he published in 1860, a year after his return to Petersburg, describes how he would sit looking in a corner of blue sky and think that there beyond the prison walls was another life. There was freedom. One day he would leave this prison behind to find that free life waiting for him, and he would live nobly, gratefully, and no more mistakes, eggs to be made. Was Dostoevsky's opposition to the radical ideology of the 1860s the expression of a repentant sinner ready to embrace monarchy and orthodoxy and the goodness of this world he had not appreciated before? Not at all if we judge notes by notes from Underground. Something else rose up in him in the presence of the underground man, this man of heightened consciousness, with his mocking attacks on the law of nature and arithmetic, on sensibleness, utility, profit, on development, civilization, and reason itself. He puts his tongue out at the crystal palace of Chernyshevsky's scientific utopian future, but he goes beyond that when he declares 2 times 2 is 4 is no longer life, gentlemen, but the beginning of death. It should be noted that the early 1860s saw the reforms brought about by the Tsar liberator Alexander II, the abolition of serfdom, the institution of public trial by jury, land reform, the relaxation of censorship, changes that the liberals of the 1840s had only dreamed of. It is by no means clear that the underground man, if he paid attention to such things, would find this reformed society any more to his liking than the future reasonableness of his radicals. To all such words he prefers his underground, and yet at one point he cries out, "Be here, too, I'm lying because I myself know, like 2 times 2, that it is not at all the underground that is better, but something different, completely different, which I thirst for, but cannot ever find." Clearly, the terms of his polemic, if polemic it is, go beyond the opposing of one set of ideas with another. Something strange seems to have happened to Dostoevsky after his return from exile. It is as if the world he had imagined his prison, the world of the blue sky and freedom, ceased to be recognizable to him, and another reality appeared in its place, one he was unprepared for and could only search out gropingly. In fact, he once described his experience of such an uncanny moment of vision, but he placed it in his past. The description, however, appeared in Petersburg Visions and Verse and Prose, a short work written in 1861. As a young man, he was returning home one evening and stopped to look along the Neva. It seemed in the end that all this world, with all its inhabitants, both the strong and the weak, with all their habitations, whether beggars' shelters or gilded palaces, at this hour twilight resembled a fantastic enchanted vision, a dream in which, in its turn, would instantly vanish and waste away as vapor into the dark blue heaven. Suddenly, a sudden strange thought began to stir inside me. I started, and my heart as if flooded in that instant by a hot jet of blood which had suddenly boiled up from the influx of amazing sensation until now which has been unknown to me. In that moment, as it were, I understood something which up to that time had only stirred in me, but had not as yet been fully comprehended. I saw clearly, as it were, into something new, a completely new world, unfamiliar to me and known only through some obscure hearsay, through a certain mysterious sign. I think that in these precise minutes my real existence began. Most important are further details of its experience. I began to look about intently, and suddenly I noticed some strange people. They are all strange, extraordinary figures, completely prosaic, and not darn garrulosos or bosses to be sure, rather darn titular counselors, and yet at the same time, as it were, a sort of fantastic titular counselors. Someone was grimacing in front of me, having hidden himself behind all this fantastic crowd. He was fidgeting some threads, some springs through, and these little dolls moved and laughed away. The ambiguous laughter, the demiurge or demon, can be heard in all Dostoevsky's later works. Here in germ was a reality that challenged powers of imitation, indefinite, something new, a completely new and unfamiliar world, prosaic and at the same time fantastic, which could have no image until he gave it one, but was more real than the vanishing spectacle he contemplated on the Neva. That he recorded this moment of vision when he did suggests that in some way he was reliving it. Behind the ideas of radicals like Chernyshevsky, Dostoevsky could hear the demiurge's laughter. Not that he underestimated the serious consequences of these ideas, he foresaw them only too clearly. His response was the world as viewed by the man from the underground, whose ruminations are circumscribed by the same ideas, but who has recognized that his life cannot be accounted for by them, that in fact it cannot be accounted for by any laws or with any logical consistency, nor can it be narrated as a meaningful sequence of events in harmonious and dignified prose. It is all discontinuous, full of the sudden and the unexpected, disharmonious and undignified, terrible and at the same time comical. From this basis he generalizes his attack on the world of the enlightened Europe, particularly as adopted by the Russian intelligentsia. No one before Dostoevsky had ever written such a book. That it failed in its immediate purpose as a reply to the radical ideology of the date is not surprising. Its dialogue was much too complex for the purpose, and artistically it was too strange, even offensive, for the common reader. Indeed, to make such admissions about oneself as the underground man does, and to lash out with such sarcastic wit, leaving the most self-evident traits of society and human reason, is no more than a transgression than an argument, as the nameless hero is aware. Notes from Underground gives voice to the double-mindedness at once guilty and defiant of the conscious transgressor. But the man from Underground transgresses only inwardly, philosophically, for the sake of a truth that he clings to, although he cannot name it, knowing that the limits he is violating are false in any case, even if he can never find the something good that is better than his underground. In Crime and Punishment, published 2 years later, the hero is an actual transgressor, the theoretician murderer Raskolnikov, and the relations between the viewer, the spectacle of the world, and this something new or something different, betrayed by the demiurge's laughter, essentially the same in Notes from Underground and in the Vision of the Neva appear once again. Indeed, there is a passage in Part 2 of Crime and Punishment that almost exactly parallels the moment Dostoevsky had described in Petersburg Visions. The day after he commits the murder, Raskolnikov is crossing a bridge over the Neva and stops to gaze at the city. He stood and looked long and intently into the distance. This place was especially familiar to him. While he was attending the university, he often used to stop, mostly on his way home, at precisely this part. He had done it perhaps 100 times, and gaze intently at the indeed splendid panorama, and to be surprised almost every time by a certain and clear and unresolved impression. An inexplicable chill always breathed on him from this splendid panorama. For him the magnificent picture was filled with a mute and deaf spirit. He marveled each time at this gloomy and mysterious impression, and mistrusting himself, put off the unreading of it to some future time. Now suddenly he abruptly recalled these former questions and perplexities, and seemed no accident to him that he should recall them now. The loud laughter here become a chill breath, the demiurge a mute and deaf spirit. The riddle remains, but the tonality has darkened considerably. Raskolnikov received this impression many times. It does not come as a result of the crime. On the contrary, he recalls it now as if his act were somehow the first step in his unreading. Crime and Punishment is a highly unusual mystery novel. The most mystified character in it is the murderer himself. We know a good deal about the genesis of the novel from Dostoevsky's letters and notebooks. When he went abroad in July 1865, he had plans in mind for 2 separate works. One, a long novel to be called The Drunkards, dealing with the current problem of drunkenness, as he wrote when proposing it to the editor of Fatherland Notes, who turned it down. The other, the psychological account of the crime, an idea that had first come to him in prison 15 years earlier. He hoped to finish The Drunkards quickly, but instead got carried away by the other story. In September 1865, he was able to send a detailed outline of it to Mikhail Khalkov, editor of the Russian Herald. Originally, he was conceived of it as a short work written in the first person, the confession of the criminal himself. The murderer, as wrote Katkov, would be an intellectually developed young man who even has good inclinations when he kills under the influence of those strange, incomplete ideas which go about floating in the air. In other words, the tale was to be a further exploration of the consequences of Russian radical ideology, particularly the ideology of the so-called nihilists who emerged in the mid-1860s. In form, it would have been similar to Notes from Underground. This was the version that Dostoevsky eventually burned. In its new form, the novel retained the general features of the hero as he had outlined them for Kakov, but the material was greatly expanded and it was no longer cast as a confession. By chance, close to the beginning of Crime and Punishment, Raskolnikov makes the acquaintance of a certain Semyon Zakharovich Marmeladov. The story of this unemployed official, the consumptive wife Katerina Ivanovna, and their family came to the novel from the abandoned pages of The Drunkards. The organic link between the two initially unrelated works being Marmeladov's daughter Sonia. Just after this meeting, Raskolnikov sees a long letter from his mother introducing yet another story involving his sister Dunya, the man of the affairs, Luzhin, and the sinister but charming Svidrigailov. There were now 3 plots instead of 1, and we begin to see something of Dostoevsky's method of composition as juxtaposition with an extremely foreshortened narrative time of large scale. Self-dramatizing speakers. Part 1 ends with the murder itself, but is already rich in possibilities for future encounters, exchanges, conflicts. Important questions remained unresolved in Dostoevsky's mind when the first part of the novel appeared in the January 1866 issue of the Russian Herald. His notebook for February shows him still working out Sonia's role, and more significantly, Raskolnikov's real motive for his crime. In some sketches, he was to be a much more articulate spokesman for the nihilists who combined rational egotism with a view of themselves as benefactors of mankind. This idea was supplanted by the Napoleonic figure of the strong individual who acts for the sake of his own power. In one version, Raskolnikov was to end the vision of Christ in the heroic deed of self-sacrifice and reconciliation. In the other, his reflection would become truly demonic, and he would finally shoot himself. Dostoevsky eventually decided against both outcomes, and Raskolnikov's motives were left unresolved to the great advantage of the novel. And to Sonia, he had thought of making a more articulate opponent of Raskolnikov's idea who would confront him sharply and write him letters possessing high artistic qualities. He finally gave only the almost mute witness of example. Instead of the vision of Christ, as a reading of the Gospel account of the raising of Lazarus in Part 4. The rational egotism goes mostly to the miserly Luzhin, the bullet to Zvidrigailov. As the material of the novel grew into its new form, emphasis shifted away from Dostoevsky's original idea of the psychological counterground and from his ongoing polemics with the nihilists. The pointedness of Notes from Underground yielded to an inclusive, expanding image of the world caught in a moment of time. A world of rather down-to-earth and yet at the same time fantastic tradesmen, tavern keepers, house painters, moneylenders, easily amused servant Natasha, the open-palmed policeman Zametov, the fanatic little radical Bezyannikov, and explosive Lieutenant Gunpowder. Dostoevsky's art gives even the most minor characters a spectacular presence, and they are constantly upstaging each other. Yet, Crime and Punishment is still the most singly focused of Dostoevsky's later novels. Its characters and events all converge in the enigma of Raskolnikov. He appears in 37 of the novel's 40 scenes, and we are allowed entry only to his consciousness and more briefly Svidrigailov's. On the other hand, the plane of happening is considerably enlarged, or rather, the limits of the accountable reality, the limits of man and nature fall away. Dreams, waking visions, even ghosts are as much a part of this world as are the buildings, bridges, and cathedrals of Petersburg. The line dividing the outer from the inner, the solid from the phantasmagorical, wavers. This is a fluid world full of coincidences, chance, or fatal meanings, crucial words that accidentally overheard. Embodied in the communicating streets and squares, the adjoining rooms and apartments of the city. Petersburg is not a backdrop for the events Dostoevsky narrates, but a constant principle in them and a mirror of Raskolnikov's soul. The enigma of the city and the enigma of the hero are one. This is not to say that Raskolnikov is a neurotic who cannot keep from projecting his inner states upon the world. The truth is that we all see as we feel, or better that our vision is always complex, always moral, always spiritual. We see beauty and goodness, we see good and evil. The struggle to empty himself of such complexities leads to terrible splits and estrangements in Raskolnikov. His name comes from the word Raskolnik, means schismatic, one who has split away from the body of the church, but he is also divided against himself. He has, as the critic Konstantin Dostoevsky wrote, a demon embodied in a humanist. Reason, in when he trusts, leads him to murder, yet reason cannot provide him with an axe when he needs one. Chance does that, and chance continues to abet him and to mock him. As transgression is step over, the Russian word for crime literally means overstepping, confronts him with dimensions of the world and of himself that he did not anticipate and cannot understand. He had been studying law at the university, but it is a representative of the law, the most unlikely, fascinating of investigators, Porfiry Petrovich, says to him, "It must be observed that the general case, the one to which all legal forms and rules are suited, and on the basis of which they are all worked out and written down in the books, simply does not exist, for the very reason that every case, let's say for instance every crime, as soon as it actually occurs, turns out into a completely particular case, sir, and sometimes just think, really completely unlike all the previous ones, sir." This may be taken to apply to the laws of reason and nature as well. The world Raskolnikov begins to discover when he leaves his closet and goes to commit his rational crime does not stand up on any laws, but again on something different. It is the same Porfiry Petrovich who tells him near the end of the novel that he still has many years ahead of him, and that he should embrace suffering and live. Don't be too clever about it, just give yourself directly to life without reasoning. There is perhaps no scene in all Dostoevsky more perfectly ambiguous than this one. Ambiguity is not incidental to Dostoevsky's vision. It is most obvious here in the comical, even farcical, scandals and absurdities surrounding the gruesome death of Marmeladov and the memorial meal following his funeral. But comical incidents abound throughout the novel. Even the central story of Raskolnikov and his struggle with fate gives origin on comedy. Then, too, much of the action has an oddly theatrical quality. Dostoevsky often uses stage terminology for setting scenes. He refers a number of times to the public so unexpectedly that earlier translators have paraphrased the term away. Are these real people? Actors in some sort of show? It is essential to Dostoevsky's art that the view is constantly shifting when dropping into horror or rising to laughter at any moment. Yet this ambiguity does not make light of suffering. On the contrary, what writer has ever revealed it so nakedly? And that precisely because he does not allow us our usual rational or sentimental evasions. Suffering is unmitigated in Crime and Punishment, and there is no answer to it. There is no law of suffering. Ambiguity touches its essence, but not its reality. Evil is the final ambiguity. Reason cannot accept it. Rationalizing ideologies deny its existence. No one calls it by name, and the silence weighs heavily on the novel, because the world of Crime and Punishment is saturated with evil, so much so that it becomes palpable. It is the dense element through which Raskolnikov moves without recognition. The vision of evils which he lacks seems to be granted in the end to Svidrigailov. The action in the second to last chapter of the novel is literally and metaphorically drenched with a torrential downpour of Svidrigailov's fear of water, with his dreams of flooding in the Neva, the drowned girl, the wet child he tries to help. The nautical man, the man of instinct and appetite, thinks he can reach the point at which evil turns into innocence, but what is possible for a stone or a tiger is not possible for a human being. Svidrigailov is soaked through what Simone Weil described as the monotony of evil. Ever anything you ever hear is equivalent. Never anything really here is imaginary. It is because of this monotony the quality plays so great a part. Condemned to a false identity, this is hell itself. Svidrigailov cannot get out of it. Raskolnikov, though he is full of lies and self-deceptions, may still lie his way to the truth. As his friend Razumikin puts it, there is no movement in his soul, there is no Svidrigailov's walls when honesty. When one event answers to the overwhelming presence of evil in the novel. This is the rising of Lazarus. And of course it is only quoted either read into the text by Sonia. We cannot accept this either. In what sort of world can Lazarus be raised from the dead? Such an event violates all laws of reason and nature. It is the quintessential particular case, and Raskolnikov, the scientific, the man of reason, would be the strong individual, or would be strong individual. He's between Sonia and Svidrigailov and cannot make up his mind. Even at the end, his pride rises up against this world. That he thinks he has defeated him by some means of one mechanism. But the part of him which is not bound by reason, and from which he is so terribly separated, has begun to work against his will. He spends the night in the same drenching rain as Svidrigailov, and he cannot resolve to take the same way out. He turns to Sonia, with painfully slow steps begins to move toward a new, hitherto completely unknown reality. There Dostoevsky leaves them. And here we shall leave the reader of this forward, with everything still to be said, for the life of a novel is not an immediate consumption, but in the performance of a summary. In every cadence, every hour, the realization of every chapter and scene of this densely composed work of poetry, Dostoevsky shows its mastery. If our translations manage to follow my template enough, it will be the best commentary. Richard Revere. Translator's note. The name of the novel's main character is given here with diminutives and variants. Russian names are composed of first name, patronymic, and the father's first name, and family name. Formal address requires use of the first name and patronymic diminutives on colonies among family and intimate friends. A shortened form of the patronymic used only in speech also suggests a certain familiarity. Accented syllables are also given in italics. Raskolnikov, Rodin Romanovich Romanich. Pulcheria Alexandrovna, Avdotia Romanovna, Marmeladov, Semyon Zakharovich Zakharik, Katerina Ivanovna, Sofia Semyonova, Polina Mikhailovna, Kolka, Lida, Svidrigailov, Arkady Ivanovich, Marfa Petrovna, Razumikin, Dmitry Prokofyevich, Porfiry Petrovich, Lucian, The name Raskolnikov comes from Raskolnikov schismatic from Raskol schism. The Raskolniki are members of the seed of Old Believers who broke away from the Russian Orthodox Church in the 17th century. Root verb is Raskoloi, the split. Razumikin comes from Razum, reason, mind, intelligence. Lebezhyanikov comes from the verb what's to fawn or flutter in a gear, literally tail-wagging manner. A note on the topography of Petersburg. The city formerly known as St. Petersburg, but normally referred to as Petersburg, was built in the orders of Tsar Peter the Great in the early 18th century. It is situated in the marshy delta where the river Neva flows westward into the Gulf of Finland. At that point, when the Neva divides into three streams, Neva, Little Neva, and the Nefta, the main part of the city is on the south bank of the Neva and is crisscrossed by canals as uncontrolled flooding. The two smaller streams from the areas of the sea known as Vasilyevsky Island between Neva and Little Neva and the Petersburg side. Right in the Neva is a well-to-do residential and amusement area called the Islands. Often, though not consistently, Dostoevsky blanks out the names of specific streets and topographical points. Scholars armed with maps have traced Raskolnikov's movements around the city and discovered the missing names, which some translators have then inserted into their versions of the novel. We have consistently followed Dostoevsky's consistencies here, assuming it had an artistic purpose.